Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am Alison May. I write as Alison May, Ali Sinclair and Amelia Berry, and this is my YouTube channel. Now, in terms of longer videos, it has been a minute since we were here last, but those of you who follow my shorts or who follow me on Instagram will be aware that for the last 4 weeks I have been trying to write the first draft of my autumn 2026 book, so the book that comes out in a year's time, and I've been trying to write that first draft in 4 weeks. And now that that is done, I finished my draft yesterday. I just kind of wanted to have a sit down and a bit of a longer chat about that process, about why I was writing the book that quickly, and what I've learned and what tips I would give to anyone who's trying to do the same thing. So that is what we are here for. Grab yourself a cup of tea, sit down, and let's get into it. So I was writing the first draft of my autumn 26 book, which is my first ever cozy crime novel. It's a paranormal cozy crime, so it has a lovely murder, it has our main character who's investigating that, it has vampires, it has werewolves, it has a ghost, it's all going on, and there are lots of jokes as well, and that comes out next autumn. And yeah, I wrote the first draft, the vast majority of the first draft, in 4 weeks. The reasons for that are really, really simple, and that is because of my contracts and because of my schedule. I'm in the equally brilliant and horrifying position of having to write 3 books this year. Now, some authors write 3 or 4 books a year every year. Wow. I am comfortable writing sort of a book and a half a year, 2 books at a push. 3 books has been a challenge. It has been a treadmill of a year. There's really been no wiggle room. There's been no pause. And I got up to mid-October knowing that I have to deliver another book before the end of the year. To be honest, my editor would probably wiggle on that a little bit, but I would rather not, because after that I need to deliver another book in the spring. So if this deadline slips, then that deadline slips and everything knocks on. So I'm aiming to deliver this book by the end of the year. And I knew that meant I was going to need a first draft by early November to give me time to edit and polish that book before I send it in, and also to give me time to do copy edits on my spring 2026 book that also have to fit in to this portion of time. So this is what I mean when I say it's a treadmill. It's not a question of, oh, 3 books a year, that's 4 months on a book, send it in, 4 months on the next book, send it in, because obviously those books come back for edits, for line edits, for proofread, so it's constantly interrupting and jumping between projects, which is how we end up with these very tight time frames. However, writing quickly isn't necessarily a huge problem for me. It's something that I do like to do. I tend to write very, very messy first drafts, and then I do a lot of the work in the edit. So this idea of writing the first draft as fast as possible isn't something that hugely terrifies me, but it is something that I do need to kind of get in the headspace and really focus in and have the right mindset to do. In this case, there's a few little asterisks around that headline that says I wrote a first draft in 4 weeks. And the first is that I'd actually already written 9,000 words of this book about a year ago. So this was a book that I sold off a pitch and the opening chapters. So I'd already written the opening chapters. I'd written the first 3 chapters, which is about 5,000 words. And then after a bit of back and forth with the editor about what she wanted, I'd written quite a detailed outline. And then I'd written another 4,000 words or so, just to kind of get myself head into the book when I was writing the outline and make sure that I was happy with the direction it was going in. So prior to this 4-week period, I actually already had 9,000 words. Some of those words may change, but I haven't gone back and edited them at this point. Those were in the bank. It's also worth pointing out that I am someone who writes fairly short first drafts. When I was looking at my kind of outline and my proposal for this book, it's a little bit more complicated than most of the things I've written recently, so I thought it would probably be a longer draft. The first draft of my most recent rom-com, for example, was 56,000 words. The book ends up being about 85. Looking at this outline, I expected this to be about a 70,000 word draft. So when I say I wrote a first draft in 4 weeks, I actually wrote about 61,000 words in 4 weeks. Now, for some people that would be a complete draft. Some people draft really, really long. So for an 80,000 word book, they might write 120 or 140,000 word draft and then edit it down, really thin it down, cut all of the flab to get to that 80 to 90,000 word novel. I'm the other way around. I tend to underwrite and then I layer in more detail, more atmosphere, more characterisation, more setting, more sense of place as I edit. So 61,000 words was ballpark what I was expecting to write during this period. And if you think of it like that, it's actually not quite as big a chunk of words as it sounds like when you say I'm writing a first draft in 4 weeks. If you write every day, 61,000 words over 28 days is 2,197 words. Maybe you don't want to write at weekends, in which case it's just north of 3,000 words, about 3,050 words a day if you split it over 20 days. However, life isn't necessarily neat like that. If you have a very rigid schedule or you don't have much else in your schedule, or you know that you have, the kids in nursery between 9 and 1 every day and that is a writing window every single day, or you know that you work part-time every morning and you write every afternoon and you have a very set schedule, splitting it up like that might absolutely work for you. That isn't how I worked at all. For me, when I look back over this 4 weeks, I can see that of the 28 days, there are actually 11 days where I wrote nothing, not a single word. Sometimes that was because of other work. Sometimes it was because of family commitments and caring responsibilities and things like that. Sometimes it was just because I sat down to write and there was nothing in the tank. Sometimes it was because of health. I have some chronic health problems which play into everything. So when I look back over the month, I actually wrote for 17 out of 28 days. Now, if that was an even split, it would come out at 3,588 words a day. But that, of course, is not how I wrote at all. Some days I wrote, I think 7,500 words was my biggest day during this 4 weeks. Some days I ground out like 500 words and felt utterly spent. So it wasn't a nice, even profile for me. For other people, that might be the way you work, but for me, it was very, very up and down. So that's the review of kind of actually how it went and how I approached it. Here are some tips if you want to try and write up your word count per day, if you want to try and write your first draft faster, if you just want to write faster generally, I do have some tips to bear in mind and some techniques that you might try. Now, the technique I used most during these 4 weeks, on those big days when I was writing 5, 6, 7,000 words, was a technique that I call every hour on the hour. I've talked about this in one of my shorts already, but for anyone who missed that, I've sort of nicked this technique from the fitness industry and from interval training and the idea of every minute on the minute exercise regimes. My idea of every hour on the hour writing is that at the top of the hour, so at 9 a.m, 10 a.m, 11 a.m, I will sit down and write 1,000 words. Now, if that 1,000 words takes me half an hour, I've got half an hour of free time. If that 1,000 words takes me 59.5 minutes, then I need to go straight into the next 1,000 words at the top of the next hour. That is based on me knowing that if I'm just in a flow and at a good typing speed, I will write 1,000 words in about 40 minutes or so. So 1,000 words an hour is a good sustainable pace for me. Sometimes 1,000 words will take 55 minutes, sometimes it will only take half an hour, but probably 40 to 45 is my average. And then you've got yourself a little toilet, checking email, snack, scrolling Instagram break built in. And that incentivises me. I always, pretty much, if I can, define my targets in terms of a word count rather than an amount of time, just because I'm perfectly capable of just sitting and staring at the screen and not writing anything. If I go, I'm going to write from 9 till 1, and I'm going to do as much as I can between 9 and 1, I can do absolutely nothing between 9 and 1, but go, well, I've sat at my desk with the manuscript open, I've been writing. Whereas if I define it by a word count, I find that much more incentivising, because as soon as your word count's done, you're free! And you don't have to stare at the manuscript anymore. So every hour on the hour is the technique I've used the most. But there are lots of other ways to encourage yourself to kind of sprint write. The Pomodoro technique is really, really popular. So that's the idea that you set a timer, usually for 25 minutes, and you do the activity, whatever the activity is, in this case writing, for 25 minutes. And then you have a 5-minute break to stretch your legs, go to the loo, get a cup of tea, whatever it is, and then you reset your timer and you do another 25 minutes. And you just work through your task, your writing project in that way. The other option, if you're using Windows, the clock in Windows 11 has a feature called Focus Sessions, and you just tell it how long you want to work for, and it will beep at you when you're due for a break. So if you say, oh, I want to work for 2 hours, it will break that down into kind of 20 to 30 minute chunks and give you a 5-minute break after each of those chunks, and you just let your computer tell you what to do. The benefit of that is if you set it up as a focus session on your computer, you can also then make your computer turn off notifications while you're in that focus session, so you don't get email and social media and things like bopping up notifications at you. So that can be quite helpful. The other timed session that I do still sometimes use, I used to do this religiously every day, now I kind of bob in and out as I feel it would be helpful, is something called Writers' Hour. So this is run by the London Writers' Salon. If you search for London Writers' Salon Writers' Hour on Google, you will find it. I will put a link down below in the description. And this runs 4 times a day at 8 AM UK time, US East Coast time, US West Coast time, and then it's either Wellington or Sydney. I think it's Wellington, New Zealand time. So it's the equivalent of 8 AM in each of those time zones. And you log on and it's a massive group Zoom, and everyone in that Zoom is just writing for that hour. So there's 5 minutes of introduction. They usually read a kind of motivational quote or something to get you in the right headspace. And then the etiquette is that you either write or you do absolutely nothing. So if you end up just sitting staring at the wall, that's fine. If your brain doesn't have the words in it, that's okay, but you're not allowed to do anything else. And then at the end of the hour, they bring everyone back together for a couple of minutes, check in on how it went, and you carry on with your day. So that's a really nice technique. I have no idea why it works, because it's just people in a Zoom window. The peer pressure shouldn't be as effective as it is, but somehow it is really effective for focusing the mind if you're struggling to find that focus. And those are the days that I still do that. If I know I've got a really, really busy day, but I want to know I've done some writing, I log in at 8 AM and I've kind of then ticked that off for the day. Or just if I know I've been struggling to concentrate all day, I've been procrastinating, my head hasn't been in it, I will log into one of the ones that falls later in the day in the UK, and can try and just like get my brain back into the manuscript at that point. So the Writers' Hour from London Writers' Salon is another really good option. So those are my kind of practical tips. My other tips are a little bit more to do with attitude and approach. So the first one is that I want you to lose the perfection mindset. It's really easy when you're trying to do any task in a kind of very timed, very focused way to get into a mindset where if you're not doing it perfectly, you lose motivation. So it's the same with dieting. You have one biscuit and go, oh, well, I've had a biscuit. There's no point carrying on. I might as well eat all of the biscuits now. Whereas actually, if you've just had one biscuit, it's fine. The problem comes when you then eat all of the biscuits because you've been down on yourself about one little slip up. And I think you have to approach this in the same way. If your target is to write 3,000 words a day, there will be days you don't make it. Take a breath, relax, move on to the next day, and embrace the idea that there might be some days where you write more than that and it feels easy and it's flowing and you just keep going, and let those days balance out. And if those days don't balance out, there's just some days where you don't quite make it and you end up writing 50,000 words in 4 weeks rather than 60 or 70,000 words in 4 weeks. Well, that's okay. That's still 50,000 words you probably wouldn't have had if you hadn't set yourself that ambitious target. So lose the perfection mindset, because the perfection mindset is what leads us to then go, oh, I've messed up, there's no point. And following on from that, sort of the same advice, but just flipped around a little bit, learn to brush off failure. Learn to brush off the days where it doesn't go according to plan, because if you don't, then that becomes a pattern. If you get yourself into the headspace of going, oh, today didn't go very well, oh, probably today isn't going to go very well either, it becomes self-fulfilling. So get yourself into the headspace where we're not aiming perfection, good enough is good enough, and when it doesn't work out, we brush it off and we move on. We don't let ourselves have that memory of, oh, it went really badly, so it's bound to go really badly tomorrow. Brush it off, brush it off, brush it off. Every day is a new day. And finally, I want to just wrap up with a couple of things that I learned from me personally for doing this. The first, and I sort of already knew this, but this really, really re-emphasised it, is that the super high word count days are way easier than the days when you grind out 500 words and it just doesn't feel right. And I think recognising that helps you get out of that perfection mindset. Because if you think, oh, I did 7,000 words, it was a really good day, I did really well today, the flip of that is if you only do 500 words, you think, oh, I did terribly today, this is all my fault. Whereas if we acknowledge that actually the days when you write loads, it's because it's flowing, it's because you're in the zone, it's because the story is all there in front of you, it's because the voices inside your head are playing nicely, those days are easy. Still pat yourself on the back of them. But the days that you get through, where you get 500 words or 1,000 words out, when really it feels like pushing a rock uphill, it feels like you're wading through treacle, those days are the real achievement days, because those are the days that you haven't given up, you've kept going, you've ground something out and you've moved a little step closer to where you need to be than you were before, even though it was really hard work. So congratulate yourself for the hard days as much as for the easy days. And the other thing I've learned is that time when an idea is on the back burner is never wasted time. Part of the reason I was able to write this draft so quickly, and for the most part quite enjoy writing it, was because the idea was already really, really fleshed out. Because I first came up with it 2 years ago, nearly 18 months, 20 months, that sort of ballpark year ago. I pitched it to an editor, we did some back and forth, I wrote some opening chapters, I wrote a really detailed outline, and that happened over the period of about a year of kind of keep dipping back into this and just doing a little bit to kind of progress the discussion. And actually that was incredibly helpful, because it's been there in the back of my mind that whole time when I've been writing other projects and doing other things. So when I came to write it, it was already fairly fully formed and I wasn't starting from a blank sheet of paper. So I'm going to try, I think, now to really build that into my writing practice going forward, is to take some time out to play with ideas that I know I'm not going to write straight away, that I know aren't the next book under contract or aren't the next book in this particular series, but are something that I would like to write in the future. Because that day or two here and there, just spotted through wherever you have time, of playing with an idea, writing a couple of scenes, maybe writing some character descriptions, maybe writing a little bit of world building notes, some setting notes. Actually, the fact that I'd done all of that already was what made writing this fast a relatively painless process. And I think sometimes we think if we're not writing, if we're not things on keyboards, words on manuscript, we're not progressing our writing, we're not progressing our writing projects. And I think actually nothing could be further from the truth. In a way, getting the words into the manuscript is the easy bit if you've done all of that pre-thinking. And by pre-thinking, I don't necessarily mean detailed planning. I had no detailed plan at all for this. I had a rough story outline, but it said things like, the killer is revealed at the climax. I hadn't decided in this crime novel who the murderer was before I sat down and started writing this draft. I hadn't even decided 100% who was killed. I knew who was killed at the beginning, but I was fairly sure there was going to be a second murder later in the book, and I hadn't even decided who that was. As it turned out, I don't think I'd even thought of the character. I don't think they even existed at the point where I was writing the outline. So I don't necessarily mean making a detailed plan. I just mean letting your brain noodle away at the idea in the background, so that when you come to sit down and write, you know who these people are, you know what this world is. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen, you don't necessarily know how the story's going to unfold, but you can feel the world that you're creating. So time spent with an idea on the back burner is never wasted time. So that's me. That is how I wrote the first draft of a novel, give or take, in 4 weeks, and what I learned from doing it. It's definitely something I would do again. I am a writer who definitely does most of the work to make the thing good in the edit, so getting a first draft down as quickly as possible I think is a really good system for me, so it's definitely something I would attempt again. If you have any questions at all, pop them in the comments. I will attempt to answer those if I can. If you're not already following me on Instagram, please do. Again, link will be down in the description. But for now, happy writing and so long.